Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the FwooshCast. With you, as usual, is me, Veebs, or Nick, if you nasty. And I am very thrilled to welcome Mr. Thomas Gwyn to the FwooshCast for the first time. If you don't know the name, I'm positive you know the work, but we're very happy to have you here, Thomas. Sculptor extraordinaire. I don't know exactly what you like to call yourself professionally, but thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Great being here. Obviously, been following you guys for a while now. It's kind of mandatory to follow the Fwoosh if you're in the hobby. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming on, and I don't know why it's taken us so long to make this happen. That's on me. It's like I get on hot streaks, and then I kind of like, oh, I haven't had any chats for a while. But you've been working in the action figure world as a sculptor for quite a while at this point, I think. And I'd love to talk about what you're working on currently and whatnot. But since this is your first time on the show, I'd love to just go through with a little bit of an introduction with, what your current role is and how you got there. So you currently are with Neca, right? Can you talk about what your I guess your not your primary role, but your formal role is with the company?
Yeah. So this year marks my 13th year at Neca. That's 10 years full time and 3 years as contract work. But even when I was doing the contract work, I was coming into the studio every day. I work from home now. I am a sculptor, fabricator, seamster, do a little bit of everything. I used to tell people that I was kind of like Randy's Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
If he needed something done, I could do it. And that I can do because of my background, which is I have an art degree. Most sculptors do, but I have a terminal BFA in sculpture and drawing, and wrapped up in that is metalsmithing and ceramics and woodworking and basically I'm probably overeducated in how to work with many materials, welding, metal casting. I really wanted to learn as much as I could while I was in college. And then towards the end of that, around 2002, I was reading an article in Toy Fair magazine. If everybody remembers good old Toy Fair. And it was an interview with the Four Horsemen. And I can't remember the interviewer's name or who said it, but someone asked one of the horsemen, if you wanted to get into the toy industry, or if you wanted to do what you guys do, what would you do? And again, I can't remember who, but they said, well, there's this toy design program in New York City at a school called the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT. And light bulb went off in my head. And from about that moment on, I decided I wanted to be an action figure sculptor. That sort of commercial sculpting is not looked upon highly, let's say, in an academic kind of art setting where fine art is the mode of the day. But so I got my fine art education, but at the same time was kind of fostering the desire to be a toy sculptor. So I got myself a chunk of Castelline. Actually, I think I started with like Super Sculpting.
Yeah.
Found some online forums. Back then, it was like the Clubhouse forum and Statue forum, where you had like professionals chiming in to help, amateur sculptors figure out things. And so I pushed that and pushed that all through my college career. And then towards the end of my college, I knew that I wanted to go to FIT. So I applied and they accepted me and moved the family up to New Jersey, shuttled into Manhattan every day for 2 years.
Yeah.
Graduated from there in 2010. And then was, one of the good things about the FIT toy program is that they try to connect the students with people in the industry for jobs. And Judy Ellis, the director of the program, got me an interview with Randy Falk, and went in, interviewed, been there 13 years.
Wow. So when you when you started your, formal education, especially as you said at the beginning with, the fine arts piece of that, were you into or a collector or an appreciator of action figures at that time, or?
Oh yeah. So I can't remember a time when I didn't collect action figures. I think a lot of us could easily say that, but like I can remember being 11 years old and making it was like a sheet of notebook paper and it said the Museum of Fast Food Toys. And I had like made this like setup on a shelf in my room, and like my friends would come over and they're like, dude, what are you doing? We should be like, chasing girls and playing ball. And I was like, but these are cool. Like someone actually like made this. Like, I don't know. I've always been fascinated by toys. I was a middle kid, so there's some psychology there of being the traditional middle kid, being by myself, and just always having my toys there. I've always been a collector. And then I think '89 was a big year for people of my generation when Batman came out, Keaton Batman. And that was the first time I remember like looking through like a department store circular and seeing an ad for the Toy Biz figures and being like, I want to go hunt those down.
Yeah.
And so I kind of mark '89 as my year of becoming a like real collector. And going on from there, Jim Lee, Chris Claremont, X-Men came out in '91. And then the Toy Biz Marvel stuff started rolling out around then, and I was chasing after that.
Yeah.
And it's never stopped. When I decided that I wanted to like become a toy maker, the 2000X He-Man stuff was hitting. So, I think everybody's been obsessed with the Horseman since.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I've been collecting for a while.
Wow. Well, it's cool to hear that you kind of got connected with Randy right out of FIT. What was it like in terms of getting like that being like your first like maybe exposure to like being in a company where that is the business of making action figures? And I've been to the studio in New Jersey, and NECA had been established, I think, for a while by the time that came along. But it had to be from not only a professional standpoint but maybe a collector fanboy standpoint, it had to be pretty mind-blowing walking into that scenario, right?
Absolutely. And as well as I do that there's the 2-up prototypes that kind of circular the room on those shelves. And as a sculptor, I walked in there knowing the work of Kyle Wendricks and Jason Fraley and the people that, and yeah, I was blown away. And Randy gave me the nickel tour, and I'm just like, looking around with my jaw hanging open. I was like, I can't believe I'm here. Yeah. And I think there was like some imposter syndrome as well, because it's like, what the hell am I doing here? Like,
yeah.
I was hoping at best I might, sculpt some Spider-Man figures or, but nothing at the level of NECA. I just didn't think that I was there yet. But I think at that time there was kind of a shift in who was doing the work. Some people had left. Randy was bringing in a new crew. David Silva had just started there.
Yeah.
I think Trevor Zammit was getting ready to start. Yeah. He started around the same time I did. There was a few people that are like coming from McFarlane and other companies, and so yeah, it was a wild experience, to say the least.
Do you remember, well, if it's something that came out and was released and you can talk about, do you remember the first few things that you started working on when you started at NECA?
Absolutely. It was a Scream bobblehead. Was the first thing that I did. It's on my desk right now, but it's behind a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I think Scream 4 was getting ready to come out, and they wanted to test me out, see what I could do. So, at the time, a bobblehead at NECA, or the Head Knockers, was kind of like, obviously it's not an action figure,
right.
And the level of detail didn't have to be as tight. So it was a great way to kind of start someone out.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was the Scream bobblehead. I think it did a great job on the head. Kyle Wendricks was there, kind of helping me along, showing me some of the Neca techniques, as they say, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. Well, and then, like I said, I'm sure, Neca and Randy and whomever deserves the credit for it, it's always very good about crediting the artists on the packaging of releases who have worked on it. But even then, I think there are probably a lot of people who are watching that have a decent amount of your work on their shelves. So over the years, you said you started with the bobblehead, but you eventually made it into like the action figure sculpting. What are some historical things that you've worked on that I guess maybe that you've enjoyed the most working on for NECA?
Well, let me say it this way. Because of my ability to kind of do everything, I may not have the portfolio of full figures, right? Like a lot of people do. Like,
gotcha.
Kyle Wendricks probably has hundreds of figures under his belt. So I think my first full figure was Pyro for the Team Fortress 2 figures.
Okay.
My first kind of portrait land, that's kind of the top tier, like if you're doing portrait work.
Yeah.
And I say portrait work because he had a mask on, but it was the motherfucker for Kick-Ass 2.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That was a whole figure.
The likeness comes through on that.
Thanks. Yeah. Planet of the Apes, our first go at that. It was Alex Heinke and myself doing a lot of work on that. Kyle Wendricks doing the rough outs.
Yeah.
That was, thinking about your question, what I'm thinking about is like where were my learning experiences? Like where did I like pick up things? Gosh, I don't know. I mean, over 13 years, I think I've touched every license that we've done. Shining moments, fabrication wise, I helped figure out the mechanical eye movement for the Mogwai figures that we do.
Oh yeah, I have every single one of those. So yeah.
There was a terrifying day when Randy walked up to me with the thigh from a 7-inch RoboCop figure, and he said, "We need this to be able to open." And I was, it's one of those things where, like, in the back of your head, you're like freaking out, but you're like, you always tell the boss, "Sure, no problem."
Yeah.
And but that was a lot of fun. I'll enjoy working with the mechanisms and kind of mechanical problems like that. But gosh, Predator 2, the City Hunter, I did. It's going to sound silly to say, but I did one of his forearms. And that's it. That, at NECA, used to, not so much anymore, but used to, you might have 3 different sculptors working on one figure.
Yeah.
And that Predator 2 was my first kind of introduction into that. And I got that one forearm, and it took me forever just because Kyle wanted it to be so precise. And it was the first time that they ever pushed me to the point where I realized, okay, this is how NECA wants things to be. You can't be lazy. You can't take shortcuts. You can't just say good enough ever.
Right.
Like it,
Do you think a lot of that collaboration came from the studio environment? And at the time, what medium were you working in? Was it still more traditional at the time when you were, working on stuff like that?
Yeah. I don't know that it's the studio environment that caused that collaboration as so much as just pragmatism and expediency. Like to have one person sculpt a Predator figure would probably take 8 to 10 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So you want to get things out as fast as you can. So having multiple sculptors on something gets it done a little faster, and everybody's good at certain things.
Right.
And as far as materials, most of it was Castelline, kind of that green grayish stuff that people will see But I also like the Hasbro wax,
Hmm.
which is much harder. It's more like a jewelry kind of carving wax. You can be a little
Yeah.
more heavy-handed. You can be more precise with mechanical looking stuff. And combining that with like styrene to get kind of sharp mechanical edges, for something like a Predator that's got, this forearm gauntlets and the bios and the lasers and all that. So it's a little bit of mixed media.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you still work in a lot of traditional media, and and you moved to digital, and how was that process? As far as, because it seems like to me, I've spoken with a lot of sculptors who have obviously made the change from traditional to exclusively digital or mixed the two, and it seems like their experience and learning curve has all been completely different. How was that for you?
Uh, well, um, kind of answering all of your questions there. I still work personally in traditional media.
Mhm.
There's a piece right behind me in my studio on a sculpture stand that's Chavant Hard
Yeah.
clay. It's a two-headed garden gnome that I'm making for my garden.
Awesome.
If you are a sculptor, well, speaking personally, it's a compulsion, right? Like I have to work with my hands. I don't know what I'd be doing if I didn't.
Right.
So I still work in traditional materials. I've got giant logs outside my house right now that I'm carving into.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, and I have to do that just to maintain some sanity because the digital stuff, as great as it is, and I love it, doesn't satisfy that need to kind of like chew into a material and really work with my hands and sweat and bleed um, so I made the transition to digital during the pandemic,
Hmm.
and that was rough to say the least. Um, Everybody's working from home and communications are kind of not what they should be, but um, I had a guy locally who I had gone to school with who was a digital guy,
Yeah.
and Marty Henley, who now works for Neca.
Yeah.
He sculpted Grim Sword. If you saw the Krampus this past
Yeah.
toy fair, that's his work. And Marty is a digital guy that I had met back in college. He was in graduate studies program for sculpting, doing makeup effects and kind of
Oh, yeah.
practical
Yeah.
movie effects. But he's a traditional digital guy. If that makes sense. So he started teaching me ZBrush because I could see the change in the industry happening, like
Yeah.
job security, obviously, but also I was tired of kind of the styrene mess in my desk.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, making that transition to digital, while it was hard, I wanted to do it, so it happened. And we for the first couple of years, it was fabrication work. I think the Back to the Future 2 hoverboards were
Yeah.
my first digital fabrication pieces, and then I did some guitars, a lot of Back to the Future stuff early on. Um, and then it got to a point where we got the license for the boys.
Uh-huh.
Um, and Randy said, I want to give you black noir.
Hmm.
He's like, you can do it traditional or you can do it digital. And I had a moment of panic. I was
Yeah.
like, but so initially I was going to do that figure traditionally in Castelline, working with Kyle Wendricks. And then I thought about it and thought about it, and I was like, you know what? If I'm going to really learn this digital stuff, I just need to dive in,
Yeah.
sink or swim. I knew the stakes that were there because if you know Randy's history with his feelings towards digital, it was, up to that point, he was not a fan of it. And so I knew that if I were ever going to bring him around to kind of like letting us do digital figures, that I had to do it. So
Yeah.
anyway, learned how to completely digitally sculpt action figures. I'd say it was about 90% on my own
Yeah.
because a lot of that information is not out on the internet. It kind of reminds me of the good old days when toy sculptors would like hide their wax recipes. I
Gotcha.
remember very early on, like asking people, like, what kind of wax do you use, or how do you do that? And they just ghost you.
Mm.
But we worked through it, and I think, you know, if you stand that Black Noir figure up to the other two traditionally sculpted boys figures, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to tell.
No,
So
no, no, not at all. So for the work that you do for NECA now, do you work exclusively in digital, or are there still some things that you go the traditional route with?
the only thing that I do traditionally now is the sewing.
Yeah.
If they, you know, for our 9-inch figures, or if we have sewing needed for 7-inch figures or whatever, we have a girl, a woman, Sarah, who does the bulk of that now. I do a lot less of it than I used to, but
Yeah.
occasionally, like especially if it's a figure that I'm working on, needs it, and typically I'll put that in. But everything else is digital.
Wow. Wow. Excuse me. Well, you know, being with NECA for as long as you have been now, like we said, you've had a hand in a lot of things, but I think probably at this moment, what people know the best that you're currently working on is the amazing Dungeons and Dragons line. Um, is that a dream line for you?
Uh, I, you know, when I first started seeing David Silva's design sketches for those, I was shocked. I was like, wow, that's going to be awesome. I hope I get to work on that. Was it a dream line? Probably not.
No.
I mean, when I was a kid, I can remember having Warduke and Strongheart and Zerich,
Yeah.
but and of course I love the cartoon.
Yeah.
But I was not a huge D&D fan as a kid. Like that wasn't like a big thing on my radar. I didn't play D&D until I was in high school.
Yeah.
And uh, didn't really get back into D&D until 5th edition was released back in 2014, when I, you know, thought it would be a fun thing to do with my kids. So, you know, to be honest, no, it wasn't a dream thing. It has since become my most favorite thing that I've worked on at NECA.
Yeah.
Just because I have a level of creative input,
Yeah.
let's say. So
Well, I was going to ask about that because, you know, obviously the original LJN line was one of those lines that for a long time I think people were like, hey, we've gotten a lot of updates to a lot of vintage lines and things like that. That was one that, you know, hadn't come around until we really started hearing about it a little over a year ago, I think. Maybe. How did that all come together? Because it seems like there's a lot of different D&D stuff that could be done as far as action figures go, but it seems to be a perfect fit for you guys.
yeah, I think I'll say this and then I'll answer the question. Yeah, I think from a toy standpoint, that LJN line is something most people in the 80s can relate to.
Right.
Even if you didn't have the figures, when you see Warduke, a little memory clicks off. You're like, hey, wait, I kind of remember that. And then of course everybody remembers the cartoon, and I think most people wanted those figures. So yeah, I think it made doing the LJN line made more sense than doing like a broader Dungeons and Dragons series, right? Because not everybody's going to know who like Elmister is, or Dritz, or
Right.
you know, Mordenkainen, or you know, all of these kind of like big D&D lore characters. But you know, people had the toys, people remember the cartoon. How it all came about, I'm not 100% certain on that. It's one of those things, you know, where a toy becomes successful, all of a sudden it has a bunch of different parents, right?
Yeah, right.
I know, and it's one of those things too, where like, you know, if we're in the studio, somebody will just be working and then raise up and be like, hey, why don't we do that? And if Randy hears it and it clicks off in his head, then he's
Yeah.
off and running. Um, So that being said, I know that Anthony Minichino, one of our fabricators, he was a fan of that stuff. And I think maybe he was the first to mention, hey, why don't we do this? Now, how far he said anything to the point where Randy was like, you know, hey, Dave, can you do us some design sketches?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what happened there. Obviously, Randy's a wizard with the licensing, so it may have taken him a while to go through the proper channels to see if it's even feasible.
Right.
But once, I don't know Randy's process that well either, but at some point he said, all right, Dave Silva, do some design sketches, something that we can propose to Hasbro, I guess, had the Wizards of the Coast or owned Wizards of the Coast at the time. So we would have to go through WotC and Hasbro. So Dave did the designs, and I remember seeing them. He did Warduke and Grimsword were first.
Yeah.
And one day I hope those designs come out, because the Warduke doesn't look very much like the Warduke that we ended up with.
Oh, really?
Dave did some cool things with the wings on his helmet, where it was a lot more bone detail. But anyway, so he did those. They're great. And then it was, I think it was like 3 years before somewhere between 3 and 5 years before we heard back from WotC and Hasbro about it being okay. And that's just the way the industry is, and especially with a bigger company like Hasbro.
Yeah.
Who may have plans of their own. Obviously, they probably knew a movie might be coming.
Sure.
So, but that's how it went. And then, so I remember being in the studio and seeing Dave with those sketches and being like, wow, that's really cool. And then years go by and I don't think anybody thought about it really. And then Randy, maybe a year before so then we did the Lost Wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was exciting for a lot of people. A lot of collectors really liked that line.
Yeah.
And that's when it kind of came back on the radar. Like, are we going to do, more LJN stuff? How are we going to do this? And Randy likes to keep his cards close to the vest. He likes to keep the surprises. And I was walking into Walmart to go get fabric to do for the Skyla from the Lost Wave.
Mm-hmm.
I had to make her cape. And I'm literally in the parking lot, and I get a call from Randy, and he was like, hey, we're going to do LJN Dungeons and Dragons Ultimates. And I'd like Marty Henley to work with you. We're going to start with Grimsword and Warduke. You get to pick which one you want to do and give the other one to Marty. And literally my knees kind of went out from under me. I was like so shocked that we were going to be doing this, and so excited. And of course I wanted to do Warduke. But yeah, that's kind of how it happened. And we went through the sculpting process, and now we're 5 figures in.
Yeah. And anecdotally, and at least personally, I can say that these are being extremely well received and are very popular. And obviously, as we said, these are the characters and the overall designs that are based kind of off the original LJN line. But there are some, I don't know, updates, changes, things that are maybe brought into, either color palette or some design stuff. What are some of the other like influences or thought processes aside from the vintage line that kind of go into the overall design of these figures?
So taking what I've learned from Neca, which is, Neca always tries to be as accurate as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always a fan of research. Like I just love it. That's one of the fun parts of my job is getting to research, whether it be a character's costume or a weapon they have, or the shoes they're wearing, like really finding out every little detail we can. So for Dungeons and Dragons, I started looking at a lot of books on medieval armor,
Hmm.
medieval costume. I bought a book that had the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art's armor and weapons. Really kind of poured through that stuff so that I could have a better understanding, a better knowledge base for, the little belts and straps and they call them frogs, but it's kind of that little strap that hangs off a belt where your dagger attaches to.
Yeah.
And really, just to give it that little boost of realism, right?
Well, and you say that, and because there are some materials in there like chains and things like
Mhm.
that that come through, and it's interesting to hear you talk about the research and whatnot that you've done, because I think that really, really comes out with what we've seen so far with Strongheart and Elkhorn, added weaponry and things that make sense from a practical standpoint to deal with these weapons that just add, another layer to these that I know a lot of people appreciate.
Yeah, it's also walking a fine line with fantasy as well, and
Mhm.
the licensor. You D&D has a very specific visual kind of world, right? And so
Yeah,
you can't have like authentic Celtic knotwork on there, right?
sure.
It has to look dwarvish.
Right.
And the licensor also initially, when we first presented them with the early sculpts of Warduke, we didn't really get a lot of direction up front. It was just sculpt Warduke. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it the Neca way. There's going to be skin pores and veins and scars. And I want this guy to look like he is a veteran of the battlefield.
Sure.
And the licensor came back and said, get rid of all that. They wanted more of kind of something closer to Motu classics.
Gotcha.
So, while I would love to go really deep into the realism of these things, we got to have to work with our licensor.
Yeah.
And I think it's benefited because the characters and the figures have this charm to them now.
Yes.
And that's something we talk a lot about at NECA. I remember having many conversations with David Silva about it. Like, the figures you remember, the figures that you want to hold in your hand and just make you smile when you hold them. There's a certain charm to them. There's this
Yeah.
thing that you can't put your finger on. And I think these figures have it. A lot of that is owed to our painters at NECA, Jeff Trapp and John Wardell.
Yeah.
I think Jeff did an amazing job with Warduke, Zerich.
Yeah.
John did the paint for Strongheart. And I'm not a painter. I'm not a color guy. It's like
Yeah.
the one thing that I've never pushed myself to try to figure out how to do. And so, yeah, I think they did an amazing job. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, from a personal standpoint, it's like, okay, Warduke is like the guy, right? I mean, and he was in that first wave, and I remember specifically getting that figure, like one of the very first figures that I got this year, and I was like, okay, it's going to be this year, it's going to be Warduke to beat in terms of like my favorite figure of the year. But then, man, Strongheart came out, and just with all of the, I don't know, like all of his detail and what seems like kind of built off of that first series, it's like I feel like I'm even more impressed with that figure. Which of the, because I believe you've worked on four of the first five, right? That
Yep.
have been revealed. Which one are you most proud of, or is that like picking a child?
Yeah, I think it is kind of like picking a shot. Obviously, I'm a huge Zerich fan,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'll ask you about that, but
if you notice a difference between Warduke all the way up to Strongheart, it is because I was still figuring out the digital process.
Mhm.
So when I was doing Warduke, I didn't know how to do double elbows or double knees. I didn't know how to cut in articulation digitally that would maintain the detail on his scale armor.
Right.
So we had China cut in, that stuff. So, but by the time I get to Strongheart, I think I had done Alf and a couple of other things. And so when you get to Strongheart, that extra sculpting knowledge comes through. Things that I had wished I had been able to do with Warduke comes through. I'll answer your question. My favorite is Elkhorn, and I'll tell you why. I hated Elkhorn when I was a kid. I thought that was the dumbest character. I thought he looked like one of the 7 dwarves from a Disney movie.
He had garish colors for sure.
Yeah, he's got those silly little shoes that look like he's wearing socks, and he's just a little guy. Yeah. So I really wanted our Elkhorn to be cool. I wanted him to be something somebody would be like, that's my favorite one.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of reuse from Zerich in him, but you know, I gave him that traveler's backpack, that adventurer's gear. It's got all those weapons, and it's just a really fun figure.
Well, one of the, I mean, obviously, aside from the detail and the way that I know you said that like paint and color wasn't your thing, but the way that those vintage colors were dialed in, I think just right to fit the aesthetic. All of that stuff is really cool, but I have to say that I really appreciate bringing him up. And that means in size, right? Because I think that in this line, compared to, you know, someone like Strongheart or whatnot, he fits that dwarf size much more, like that fantasy dwarf size, right? That you're accustomed to. Because in the vintage line, he was even a lot smaller than Zerich, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I'm a big fan of the Dritz novels, and you know, the big famous dwarf in that is Brunor Battlehammer, and like, so that he was there in my thought process when I was sculpting Elkhorn, but also Flint Fireforge from Dragonlance, who's kind of this older, well-traveled, seasoned. He's the best friend of kind of the head guy of the Dragonlance crew, Tanis half Elven.
Yeah.
And so when you read the lore of Strongheart and Elkhorn, that's kind of their relationship. They're like these old adventuring buddies, but Elkhorn's kind of like seen his best days. And so going through that research process and getting that kind of dwarf knowledge in my head, I knew that I didn't want him to be like a little short, kind of Disney 7 dwarf. Like I really wanted him to be kind of imposing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, you mentioned Zerich, and you know, it's like getting Zerich and Strongheart in the second series. It was like, gosh, you know, it's like building on this is going to be, I mean, that sets a pretty high standard. But you have quite a Zerich collection, right? And I know you just came, and when I say that, I mean the vintage ones, right? And I know you just got maybe another one or a couple more. How many of these are you up to at this point? And what drives that, you know, collecting Zerich?
Number 40 is in the mail. I will say that. You know, it all started again with one of our fabricator, Anthony Minichino, who had one on his desk. And I don't know what it was about that time period or what, but I just became very taken with the design aesthetic of that. The way the colors are, you know, he's kind of like asymmetrical. He's got the red, like, there was just something visually that grabbed hold of me, and I was like, I want more of those. And the figure as well, going back to that charm, like when you hold it in your hand, there's just something about it that makes me smile every time I hold a Zerich figure. And right about that same time, I had gotten the Mythic Legion's Snag figure, which I believe is an homage to Zerich.
Yep.
And so I did, I took it the rest of the way with some paint and some added armor and stuff to make it look more like Zerich. And that basically started it all. It was like this this moment interaction with Anthony, me getting that Snag figure, and then just kind of running with it. And that was, I don't know, few years ago now,
Yeah.
2017 maybe. Um, and Anthony famously, when I had done the snag custom, he was looking at it on my desk there in the studio, and he says, "I like your goblin," and that just kind of made me giggle. And so, if you ever see me post any ZARAK pics, and I've got the hashtag "I like your goblin," that's
Yeah.
where it came from. Um, but yeah, I just love the. It's not the character; it's the design of the figure. I
Mhm.
love that design.
Well, well, it's funny because I think everybody knows and appreciates, Warduke the badass, but I have had conversations with so many people that the vintage Zerich figure, they didn't know who he was. They didn't know what line he came from, but it's like he fit into a lot of different, action figure lines or play and things like that. So obviously I have friends who are into the hobby and whatnot, but even some that aren't, they're like, I know that guy, but I don't know that guy. And it almost seems like it's universal that he's that guy. And it's curious to me. But I think to your point, it speaks to the design of him, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's that weird color pop of, you got the green and the blue, and then this kind of stark black and red.
Yeah.
And it's like, why do that? Like, why does this, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. When I see it, I like it. And, he's got it. So,
Well, he's another one of those that benefits highly from the additional weaponry and things that you have included with him. And I'm a big fan of the grappling hook, especially since he can hold on to it and like scale down the wall perfectly. What made sense to, or what was it to give him a grappling hook as an accessory?
well, that's just me as a toy maker. I like playing with my toys,
Yeah.
and kind of my base position for when I'm designing a toy is what did I like when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I loved things like air raiders. I loved GI Joe figures that had, like, Alpine had the grappling hook. So it made sense for me because Zerich is an assassin, right? He's
Yeah.
a half orc assassin. So what do assassins need? They're going to need, basically the gear a ninja would need.
Yeah.
So he's going to need a grappling hook. He's going to need some daggers. I think the potion bottle he came with was something that was included in uh, the 2021 D&D campaign, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, where they introduced a lot of those LJN characters back into the lore for the first time since '84.
Wow.
And they gave him a potion of invisibility, which makes sense
Makes
for an
sense.
assassin. But to that point, if you're playing with him, there's no reason that potion can't be poisoned, right? Like
Yeah.
an assassin would need the poison. So I like to include those things. I like grappling hooks, swords. I try to design things so that everything will fit on the character.
Yeah.
That's a big deal for me. I know a lot of the guys, especially like Trevor, loves as many accessories as they can get because they do
Yeah.
their dioramas and their photos and stuff. I'm not a huge fan of tons of accessories, and so when we want them, I try to design so that everything fits on them.
Well, it just I would be a liar if I didn't say it's like I want to use this grappling hook for him and Trapjaw to work together to run that loop, because when I was a kid, you said the grappling hook, and the reason why I asked about it is that like I like got punctures in my fingers a lot because I loved having grappling hooks for my toys, and I would use those like three-pronged fishing hooks and that were like as sharp as can be, and use those too. So getting actual grappling hooks with figures, I know it's kind of silly, but I loved seeing it, and I opened the figure, I took a couple of pictures, and then I went right outside to test it out. So little touches like
That's
that are
awesome.
definitely appreciated.
Thanks, and thanks for sharing that story, or the fact that you do play with your toys.
Yeah.
that's kind of you know, going through a toy design program at FIT. That's kind of the overriding philosophy, right? Is play.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of come from with, you know, we're all adults and we're sculpting some like highly detailed stuff, and but I really like playing with my stuff, and it makes me happy to hear other people are playing as well. So,
Well, my thing is that when something takes a long time to get onto the shelf here, that it's sitting on my desk, that means that it's like hitting all the right notes. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. I've done some like moving around and whatnot, but I haven't felt bad about not really having a spot for D&D until just a couple of weeks ago, because they were all on my desk. And I've been playing with them and having to pick, accessories up off the floor, because I'll be sitting, working and playing around with them at the same time. So they definitely have that fun quality to them. So the line is still, I would like to think it's still very much in its beginning phases, right? But is the desire, the dream to get through that whole vintage lineup in this execution?
I think the desire is always there. One thing that I can honestly say about myself and all the guys at Neca is that we're huge fans of this stuff. Like,
yeah,
maybe not so much D&D in general as I might be, but everybody I think in that studio loves those LJN figures. So the desire is there. Our desire as makers does not always translate to desire among people purchasing product. So as long as the fans keep buying them, and those numbers are there, we'll keep making them. I'm not privy to those numbers.
Right.
So there's also, there's other things we want to make, right? So it's like, while I would love to do nothing more than spend the next 10 years sculpting D&D figures, there's other stuff, that's on the slate. And, so hopefully more D&D stuff comes out. When and how, that's up to Randy and other people.
Well, Randy mentioned, because I got to talk to him at Toy Fair, and I brought this line up. He's like, "Oh yeah, we got a lot of things planned," and that's always encouraging to hear. But as part of those plans, I have a couple of things. Is that you mentioned that Lost Wave, but to me, now that those have been incorporated into that vintage scale format or whatever, I hope that those would be in the hopeful plans as well for this line, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't see any reason why they couldn't be. Especially the D&D, that whole LJN line is not female heavy, right? And
yes,
so to have like I think Mercion and Deeth were the only ones from the original. So having an extra in the form of Skyla would be cool to do. Like, and she got an updated look in the Wild Beyond the Witchlight as well. So yeah, I mean, again, the desire's there. I mean, we would love to do all of them, but
let me ask you, because the vintage line had, well, the vintage times had different sized figures, and there was like what I consider to be the core, like 3 3/4 line, but then there were also some 5-inch figures, like North Lord and whatnot. Do you look at that, or do you guys think about that as, because I have not really gotten a definitive answer from anyone who knows really well historically, are those meant to scale with the 3 3/4 figures? Are those a different line, and they're not really all supposed to? Because you take one like Young Male Titan, it's like you think, well, that guy should be big and tall. But have you guys have you personally thought about how those kind of fit with everybody else?
Yeah, so in my mind, they are bigger characters.
Yeah.
Like they are, they're bigger characters. Northlord is a barbarian. You think about, again, going back to the Dritz novels, the famous barbarian character from that is Wolfgar, and he's close to 7 feet, right? And you consider Dritz is like 5.5 feet, so you know you're going to see that difference in size. Yeah, to me they fit in with the 3 3/4 figures. They're just taller characters. You know, it's in the name, Young Male Titan, right? He's I think Metaflame is also one of the big ones. Mandoom is another one. And then North Lord, Goblin King.
Goblin King, yeah.
So yeah, and I'd be lying if I said that I haven't thought about how we would deal with that. And there's a lot to consider there. You know, one of the things that make it possible for us to continue a line is reuse, right? Which has been rather difficult for this line. I mean, if you look at the characters, which is great about that LJN line, is that there's no reuse at all, right? You think about G.I. Joe from the 80s, He-Man, like it's all reuse. But so, you know, if we ever get to do the kind of Titan scale figures, it's a lot to think about, including like packaging and, you know, reuse. And
general scale, because I mean these are these ultimate, you know, figures, they're good size, and when you kind of do the scale comparison, you're talking about some pretty big figures then. Again, like that's a lot to consider. We haven't really gotten that far in with thinking about things, trying to get people to buy Strongheart and Zerich right now. But hopefully one day, like we'll get to those Titan figures. It'll be interesting. That, you know, again, like I said, I have thought about it, but nothing official, and so, you know, it's going to be a challenge. Let's put it that way. To get it produced and to get all of the, you know, if you wanted all of the Titan characters, like how are we going to do that, like economically? So we'll see. Well, you know, just as someone who, you know, knows the characters and you know, has some, you know, fan, you know, to some level of them, you know, obviously not talking about things that haven't been revealed, but is there one character that, you know, you guys that has not been announced yet that you would like consider to be like the one that you would really like to work on, or, you know, a design or something that really strikes you, that's out there?
I think it makes sense to get the Wizards out there. I would love to see that happen, especially Kellic. And you know, that's the Wizards are something that I believe would be easy to do, because you know, you look at the original figures, it's basically just a head swap, right? So if we were to do those, I would like to see Kellic. I just think there would be a lot of potential there to update that and make an evil wizard. And I mean, it's D&D, you got to have wizards, right?
I'm with you in terms of, you know, the cool design, and I think the importance of that archetype, that wizard archetype to the line too. I've got to say that, you know, you mentioned before that there aren't a lot of females in the line, but Mercion is one that you know, I picked that figure, that vintage figure up about a year ago, and it's just a really cool figure and does a great job of bringing, you know, a female design that makes sense in this context and isn't that classic 80s, oh, okay, it's the female in the line, so it's going to be like no armor and, you know, as much skin shown as possible. I have an appreciation that it's like she likes just works in perfectly, and it's like she's going to be able to battle as much as, you know, anybody else, right?
I like the design of that figure as well, because it's got this really nice balance of femininity and like strength, right?
Yeah.
She's got the cowl and the cloak or whatever, and it kind of looks like a dress, but then you move it aside and she's like armored.
Yeah.
And then she's got this great face sculpt that's unassuming. It's kind of disarming. She's very pretty.
Yeah.
But then you see the armor and the staff, and you're like, oh no,
Right.
we might be in trouble.
Right.
Yeah, I hope we get to her as well. I think Deeth is another one. Like, I think you wouldn't even know that was a female character unless you read the bio.
Yeah.
Paralay or Melf, whichever.
I was going to ask which name goes on the box there, both.
Yeah. That's another one that's going to be interesting because we're going to have to scale that differently.
Yeah, it's and it's a weird in between scale. It's like before I actually owned the figure, I didn't know that it was as short as it is, right?
Yeah. And so again, like, are we going to make that character? And if so, what's the reuse possibilities, right? Yeah. What's going to be the justification for the whole new tooling? So something that I don't think anybody's thought about, I have, but I've not heard it mentioned from any of the fan base, is all of the kind of plastic rubber toys.
Yes, I have thought about that because there are some awesome monster designs that are in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of great monsters. I personally would love to do a hook horror, but again, like, how do you justify that whole new tooling? Because you'll never reuse any of that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the troop builders, like the orcs and the skeleton warriors and
Bollywogs.
Yeah. So if the line becomes more successful, I think that there's potential for reuse there. Like, we could take our existing core characters and kind of mix and mash and maybe come up with something for those. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, I really do hope that these are finding their audience and this line is successful, because obviously, I'm a big turtle collector and I love the Universal monsters as well. But this has been probably my favorite new line of this year to collect. And I'm like you. I'm a little young for that line, the vintage line, and I didn't know anybody who was into D&D or played it growing up, but I've really come to appreciate it now as a collector, and I'm putting together a vintage collection slowly. But I would just love to. I look at those vintage figures and I just think about, man, these are going to look so cool in this modern NECA line. So I'm hoping there's going to be a lot more to see, because it was really cool to see Elkhorn at Comic-Con, but previously, you guys have brought out or shown two figures at once. So it was just like, oh, there's got to be somebody else that's going to be alongside him, hopefully soon.
Well, I think I posted it on my Instagram page. There was the interview Randy had with Pixel Dan, where Randy said, that I had sculpted 5 of 6.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a slip or an intentional little drop. You never know how Randy works, but so there's that. That's not a guarantee of anything ever. There's never any guarantees in this industry, that's for sure. But who knows? And like you said, like, I think I think we've done a really good job of at least creating some interest from the fans as to, maybe you weren't a fan in the 80s, but that's what being kind of a collector is seeing something that grabs you and then going to get it, right?
Yeah.
So I've noticed it's becoming harder for me to get my Zerichs off eBay. So somebody else is buying them.
I feel that, because it's like when I started that vintage collection, it was like I was able to get 8 or 10 of them pretty easily and at reasonable prices. But then when you get into some of the, I don't know if they're more obscure, maybe they were like not produced in the same numbers. Right now, they're getting tougher to come by. You're definitely
yeah. That whole second series.
Yeah.
I
I
think the car.
I have a good friend in Canada who was able to find a Hockler for me, because that was one that it was like it's either beat to hell or it's in pristine condition, and it's like I don't necessarily need that and I don't want that, but I finally found one that's like right there middle of the road that I'm good with, because
Yeah,
one of those that is really expensive at this point.
yeah, that's the last one that I need.
Real? Oh.
Um, and I'm a huge GI Joe collector as well. And I'm 5 figures short from being complete, 82 to 90.
Wow.
But those last 5, it's going to be like, it's like $1,000 worth of figures. And so Hockler is like, oh geez.
Yeah.
I've seen him in package at I think it was a Philly show, Philly Toy Con, a couple of years back, and it was like $400.
Wow.
And now I think that's what it's going for, loose complete.
Dang. Yeah, I'd say I'd say you're right about that. For sure. So yeah, I'm some of these other ones, it's like I kind of just take it, and I've decided that this is that vintage line is like, that's one I'll put together when the opportunities present itself. I'm not going to like on a tear to try to have everything. Because the popularity is definitely there for that. And like I said, I'm hoping that it will it's translating to people appreciating these. And I wanted to mention too, because I don't know if you have much of anything to do with this part of it, but I've got my display here, and I'm 99% out of the package collector, but I could not give up those front flaps on these, and I just think that the collaboration of the work that you guys are doing with the figures and the style of Daniel Horn makes him such an incredible, like, I don't know, part of this line too, as far as the presentation goes. So that's very much appreciated as well.
Yeah, I don't have anything to do with the packaging, but yeah, they are great. I always love when we can do original artwork on the packages. I'm not a big fan of like just stick a movie poster on it,
Yeah.
But anytime we can get original art, is always great. The only modern stuff that I really collect, and I have them all around the top of my room here, is our retro figures. And one of the reasons I love those is the artwork on the package, like the clamshell ones, not the box ones, but like the clamshell. So yeah, the D&D stuff has been great. I love that Zerich illustration. I can't wait to see what else they do.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned that you do GI Joe collecting and really the modern stuff, but what else are you into as like a fan? I mean, obviously you've got a giant Godzilla back there and whatnot, but what do you collect that right now that is the most exciting or interesting to you?
At this point, I've got almost everything that I want.
Oh, you know what? That's a rare thing to hear out of somebody who collects toys. It's like, I feel like I'm there, but that's always the next thing, right?
And it is because there has to be an emotional attachment for me, right?
Yeah.
So I have my Return of the Jedi display, vintage. I love that. I have my He-Man display. I love that.
Yeah.
Do I need Black Series? Yeah, they look cool, they're great figures, but do I need every Black Series? Do I need every GI Joe classified?
Yeah.
I don't. So what I'm looking for always is something that grabs me emotionally, takes me back to when I was a kid. And I've been staring at it through the whole interview, and what I've been looking at recently are those Remco McDonald land figures.
Yeah.
I love those things. And that's another property, for whatever reason somebody's not grabbed onto, and just
I would love it. I would absolutely love it.
I would go nuts. Like, think about like NECA Ultimate style McDonald's figures. They would be crazy.
I need it.
So there's an auction on eBay right now, a complete set of those, all 7 of the McDonald Land Remco figures, and it's relisted twice because I think they're asking a little bit too much. But
Yeah.
those have been on my radar for a while. I love Mad Balls. I have all the original head poppers.
Yeah, I've got those. I'm sitting right in front of them actually, because
Mhm.
that was my thing. I wasn't really into the actual like Mad Balls so much when I was a kid, but man, when they turned them into action figures, or
Mhm.
you know, I love them, even though they broke, like just the neck mechanism broke just by
Yeah,
looking at it at some point. So yeah.
yeah. I was never into Barnyard Commandos, but I mean, those are, I know a lot of people that were, and those are
Yeah.
that Premium DNA. Are they the
Yeah.
company that did those? Yeah, those
Yeah.
look great.
Yeah.
What else? It just, if it grabs me emotionally,
Yeah.
that's it. Like I said, I got 5 Joes I got to get. It's Rampage, 2 Night Force, and 2 Sky Patrol figures, and then
Right. Right on.
then I try not to. I say that I've gotten everything that I want. That's kind of not true. I always kind of leave the door open a little bit. So whether it's like an accessory I might need, because I'm perfectly fine with getting something that's not complete,
Yeah, me
or
too, usually.
if even like my LJN Thundercat stuff, I didn't get mint condition. I got what I could afford,
Right.
and then kind of grabbed some Tamiya paints and did some little touch ups, and
Yeah.
they look great. So there's a lot of Joe weapons that I still need to track down. There's like little bits and pieces.
Yeah.
There's always going to be something, because after the emotional attachment, obviously I'm a collector, and that chase is always
Yeah.
fun, right? I mean, we all love like going to junk stores and getting a deal, or flea markets or whatever. Yeah, I'm very much into that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's, like you said, there's always something. It's like, okay, well, I've got my full like vintage that I want up to like Ninja Turtle collection, but it's like I don't have completes on a lot of them, and it's like you always kind of keep your eye out for that kind of thing. So yeah, it never ends. And then trying to balance that with a modern collection too, it gets a little hairy at times.
Yeah,
But
I find more often than not that my modern stuff. I got a lot of modern on my desk right now, as a matter of fact,
Mhm.
which is weird. There's the Mad Balls roller cycle, but
Yeah.
I got some vintage Star Trek figures as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, and I love, again, I love toys, and so Little People stuff, Fisher Price Little People.
Yeah.
I love that old stuff, especially the ones that have mechanisms, very simple, push button stuff.
Yeah.
I found this guy the other day. It's like that. Everybody knows this
Oh
guy. If
yeah.
you're an 80s kid,
Oh yeah. The dog.
the dog, but it's like a giant one. Like, I don't
Yeah.
remember where that came from. But
Yeah, that's
anyway,
cool. Is there a modern line out right now that from a a sculptor or a creator standpoint that you really appreciate that's out there right now?
yeah, everything that was basically shown at PowerCon this past, I didn't get to go, and apparently I missed out on a really good time. But I was
Yeah,
just blown.
PowerCon's fun.
I was blown away. I was telling somebody, it was like, all of the kids from the 80s who have been wanting the big toy companies to do what they wanted
Hmm.
got fed up with waiting and basically said, you know what, screw you, we're going to do it. And
Yeah.
that's what they did. So I love the Horseman stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not a big collector of Four Horsemen stuff, but I love how they do it.
Yeah.
I love their connection with their fans.
Yeah.
I got to help out David Silva with his Creative Beasts table at the first Legions Con,
Yeah.
and it's infectious, right? Those guys that are like the Legion builders and the like customizers, they love that stuff, and it's amazing to be around. Speaking of Dave, his Cyberzoic stuff,
Yeah.
that Kickstarter is going strong right now. Dave is, if you've ever met Dave. He is unstoppable, really. Like he's just this kind of force.
Yeah.
Amazing sculptor, amazing creative. So his stuff's great. I backed Savage Crucible.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that was some good addition to the fantasy.
Yeah.
What else? I backed what's it called? Call Sign. I can't remember the name of it, but it was 3 3/4 O-ring size figures, or
Oh yeah.
Call Sign Longbow.
Oh yeah.
Got the Robo Skull. I'm super
Oh
pumped for
yeah.
that stuff.
And I got the chance to meet and talk with them at PowerCon, and just great guys. And this is their first thing, and they want to get it done and get it out, but man, they're doing it right, and it's exciting for me to see what they're going to be up to next, because they're doing things the right way, for sure.
Yeah, and it all looks so great. It's gonna be a pain in the butt for my bank account, but
Yeah, I feel that.
Budget and spend responsibly, my friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I love seeing, I don't know. I think adult collecting is going to move past kind of the toy aisle, right? This is my own personal thoughts about like where the future lies. And it's going to become this kind of niche market that's focused on the buyer, right? So it's going to be kind of you're going to have people like the Horsemen who really cater to the buyer and to their fans. And I hope that that's what we're going to see more of, right? I know that Dave Silva kind of does that with his Cyberzoic and Beast of the Mesozoic. He really wants the fans to be happy with spending that much money on his creation, like and it is his creation, so he loves it. He wants people to enjoy it and love it as well. I hope that we see prices come down for everything around us, but I think if you're getting catered to the way that a lot of those companies are catering, then maybe that price justification will be okay. I mean, I went all in on Cyberzoic, not just because I love Dave as a friend, but because it's a cool looking product. Like that is a toy that I would want. And Dave's going to give it to you. So yeah, bring on all the modern stuff. I get these, 40 to 50-year-olds making toys, I say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to come and
thanks
chat
for having me.
with us. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next, especially with the things that you're working on, and you do a great job of I enjoy your Instagram feed specifically, so people can find you at Thomas Gwyn Sculpture, right?
I think it's Thomas Gwyn Toy Sculpt.
Toy Sculpt. Okay. Easy to find with the Thomas Gwyn part, for sure. But I love seeing what you're putting together as far as your collection goes, and when you can show things that you've worked on as well, and really need as many people as possible to make that Warduke Wednesday hashtag come out every week, because that's a fun one too. But everybody can check you out on there, and that's really probably your most prolific social media outlet as far as your work goes, right?
Yeah, I've not had a Facebook account in 10 years. I don't do TikTok, I don't do Twitter. It's that's not what I have time for, really.
Right.
I like sharing. I'm a toy guy, so I like sharing kind of the behind the scenes stuff, but I also like making stuff, so I think my time's better spent cranking out toys.
Absolutely. Than falling down social media and internet rabbit holes that can make hours of your life vanish. Yeah. No, I understand. Well, again, thanks so much for coming on and, talking about your history, D&D, of course. Can't wait to see what's next for that. But hopefully the opportunity will present itself again to have you back on, and we can talk more about, what's been revealed and what you've worked on between now and then. But thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks again for joining us on another FwooshCast. And until next time, we'll catch you later. Thanks, everybody.